Good afternoon, Harlem and Harlems of the world. I am Terry Wisdom, and this is Harlem Network News. As many of you know, Harlem Network News is a new media platform. We started at the onset of COVID, and it has really been quite a journey. We really jumped in the deep water to just assure that Harlem and the Harlems of the world were informed, because often our stories are not told or not told properly. And we want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on. And we also know that knowledge is power. Here we are, and we're almost 2 years in. It's beyond amazing that that is the case. And we're almost 2 years into COVID as well. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, HarlemNetworkNews.com, Twitter, Clubhouse, and soon to be Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Today, of course, is a very special day. We are on the eve of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which is historic. There was a great fight and surge for us to get that going. Even poets like Gil Scott-Heron were involved. The song came out with Stevie Wonder, who championed it. So this is really, really a powerful and amazing time and day, and a great feat for this country. However, at the same time, we find ourselves fighting for voting rights, which is unconscionable. After Dr. King and many others, countless others died, for the cause. So we've got to look at what is going on in this country. Before I go any further, I do want to say that we have our Honorable Congressman Adriano Espaillat from District 13 here, which encompasses Harlem, Washington Heights, part of the more western part of the Bronx, East Harlem, very diverse district and hard to balance. But Congressman Espaillat is doing his best, and we keep pushing him to do more than his best. So Congressman Espaillat, if you would just, say hello to all of our guests. I know that you just shared that you were in the Bronx today for the mass funerals for all of those that transitioned in the fire. So it's just a lot going on. We want to also salute our beloved Sidney Poitier, who was really a great part of the civil rights movement with Dr. King. He and Harry Belafonte at one point raised over $70,000. And more than that, they actually walked the pickets with Dr. King, which was, quite an incredible feat given their stature. So welcome. And also, I'm not doing any shows without speaking of all of those we lost in 2021, 2022, my son included, to gun violence, Ali Wisdom, Colombo the Shining Star. And we're still trying to make sure that, the person who did the gun violence is found. There's no leads, but we're working on it diligently. And I know, Congressman, you and other public officials are going to join us in that fight and journey. We have so much going on. And I also just want to send up prayers for Fatima Muhammad, who they just had a janaz at the mosque on 116th today. She lost her life in childbirth, and which says a lot, because we have a lot in our community in terms of our childbearing, childbirth. So we just want to give out prayers to the family. The baby survived. She gave prayers to her husband, mother, siblings, father, everyone. So got a lot going on in our community, but we're standing firm. So Congressman Espaillat, if you would just share a little bit about who you are, whose you are, and what's been going on in Congress with this voting rights bill. I know that you actually spoke on the floor this week, for it, but tell us what's happening, because we as laymen don't really understand what is going on in 2022. Thank you.
Well, first, Terry, thank you again for what you've done. I think sometimes when folks get engaged in something, particularly something effective and good, they sort of like look track on the impact that they're having. But let me say to you, I think that what you've done during the pandemic, very few people have done, and you were very efficient in keeping people informed. And you used this platform to make sure that the neighborhoods that I represent were informed of what was available to them, and I thank you for that. As you said this morning, I went over to the Bronx to be part of those services. It's out of my district, but this is really a New York City tragedy, and wanted to share this moment with show solidarity to the African, particularly Gambian community that lost their sons and daughters and children that were there and adults that were there. And the city has to come around and support this community because they're an important part of the city. I was there with Congressman Richie Torres, who represents that district. And we're going to be working, Terry, the last four serious fires, big fires in the city of New York in the last maybe 30 years have all occurred in the Bronx.
Wow.
And so there is, including Happyland. So you may remember that one.
Yes. That was the nightclub. Yes.
Yeah, the nightclub. Yeah. So we got to take a look at the conditions of the housing stock there. Why is this happening in a very defined area? Mm-hmm. What's going on there? Is it that heat is not being provided legally and appropriately, and people are buying these electric heaters? Is it the actual condition of the housing stock, the wiring, the electrical wiring in the buildings? Is it, what is it that is contributing to these horrific fires? And then to find solutions to those pending problems. And so Congressman Richie Torres and myself committed to taking a deep dive into this and figuring out, using all the tools that the federal government can give us to find out what's going on and to take the corrective steps to try to begin to fix that. But in the meantime, we have to really show solidarity with the families in the Bronx. Sidney Poitier, what can I tell you? A young immigrant kid like myself coming into the United States and just like running into this figure, right? In the heat of the night was my favorite, right?
Okay.
And it's just like, I could never forget this guy, even though I was a little boy and maybe didn't speak the language, but was captured by his presence in the big screen. And of course, as an activist, he did so much. And gun violence continues to ravage our communities. Terry, you know how I feel about that. We had a horrific homicide in East Harlem this past week, of a young woman that worked in Burger King and was shot and killed in a holdup. And just horrible. 19 years old, working the midnight shift. She gave the money to the person, and the person went ahead and shot her dead. I've spoken to the family. I spoke to the district attorney on it, and I'm scheduled to speak to the police commissioner so that the arrest has been made already. I believe it was yesterday that they made the arrest.
Okay.
One arrest, and so we're hopeful that justice comes. We'll be pushing for justice for that particular family. So a lot is going on. COVID is still in the midst of us. It's still, raging in our neighborhoods. Hopefully we hit the peak this week and we start to see the numbers go down. But I encourage everybody to still, mask themselves, social distance, still do this, because vaccinate first and foremost. But, even though you're vaccinated, you could get the COVID, as I did twice. And
yes, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it could help you. It could help you. And so we're still in the middle of that. So a lot is on our shoulders, right, as we start the year. And in top of that, you have the big fight in Washington. As you know, tomorrow we're going to be celebrating Dr. King. And, Dr. King was very specific about not just the noise and the the statements made by our enemies, but the silence of our friends, right? He felt that the silence of people of goodwill could be more detrimental than nasty words coming from your enemies and opponents. So we must speak out. And so we have the John Lewis Voting Rights and Advancement Act. That's H.R. 4. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. That bill is important because that bill seeks to preserve some of the voting rights and privileges that were given to us by the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that were diluted and almost eliminated by the Shelby County versus Holder case in 2013. And the Voting Rights Act basically gave you the ability to stop discrimination, right? So if a particular district, let's say, was being drawn after gerrymander, after redistricting, right? The Department of Justice will have pre-clearance power, meaning that they will have to go through that first to ensure that there was no discriminatory practices. There was the ability to challenge discriminatory laws that was embedded in the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And so the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act seeks to restore those that were done away by the Shelby case in court, right? And so this is so important that we pass this, right? And American voters need this. They need to have that protection from racial discrimination at the ballot box. Following that decision, the Shelby decision, several states began to pass sweeping voter suppression legislation to prevent minorities and seniors from accessing and youth from accessing the voting polls. It also was enabled by the Supreme Court decisions that, as I said earlier, weakened the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So this bill, the John Lewis bill, is so important for all of us. It changes this discriminatory voter ID laws, the reduction of a bunch of stuff that makes it more difficult for us to cast our votes. In the Senate, we also have the Freedom to Vote Act, which is a broad package of voting laws, including redistricting, non-partial, impartial, right? Redistricting practices, election security, campaign finance reform. It's an important bill that will protect our election from voter suppression, from gerrymandering and dark money coming in. It will support things like early and mail voting. Election day will be established as a national holiday, campaign transparency, voting rights restoration. It will ban partisan gerrymandering. So these two pieces of legislation are critical, right? And so we need 50 votes in the Senate to pass them. I got a message today from Senator Schumer, and I wanted to thank him because he will be putting these bills on the floor, on the Senate floor. Now you have two senators, Senator Manchin from West Virginia and Senator Sinema from Arizona, who are Democrats and are holding up the numbers, the 50 votes that we need to avoid a filibuster. Now, a filibuster, we may remember the filibuster from that movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Congress, where this guy got up on the floor and debated a bill for hours upon hours upon that.
Okay.
But that's not the modern filibuster. The filibuster, just requires someone to notify McConnell or the leader of the Senate, right, that they will filibuster a bill. And unless you have those 50 votes, then you have to get then 60 votes. That includes an additional 10 votes from the Republican side of the aisle. And so we need to avoid and to do away with the filibuster to pass this voting rights pieces of legislation. And this week, after much debate in the public debate, they will be taken to the floor for a formal debate and hopefully for a vote. One thing is for Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema to speak about what they feel or what they may or may not do. Another thing is for them to cast a vote on the floor and tell their constituents that they're not with this.
Just to stop you for a second, because this is very confusing to the layman people. Thank you so much for explaining what the filibuster is and the reason for now to stop that. But you started to speak about, and this is Harlem Network News, and I'm Terry Wisdom, and I'm here with our Congressman Adriano Espaillat from the 13th District. But, and we're talking about voting rights bills that are on the floor. What is the position of Manchin and other people? Because their names keep coming up, but I don't think that we as the layman people really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. So if you could,
as I said earlier,
explanation, that would be great.
That's a good question, Terry, because I think the people need to understand the intricacies of these debates, right? And so Manchin and Sinema seem to feel that they do not want to get rid of the filibuster rule, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the filibuster was a strategy that was developed during Jim Crow to really combat. It was a tool, an arsenal to combat some of the important civil rights and voting right legislation that were passed historically in Congress. And so Sinema and Manchin seem to position themselves that they do not want to do away with the filibuster. Now, if you have the power to filibuster, the only way you can do that, you can pass legislation, is if you count with 60 votes. Right now, the Senate is 50-50, and it's tie, pretty much tie. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, sits presiding the Senate, so she could break the tie. But you can't, we won't be able to get the 60 votes. We won't be able to get an additional 10 votes from the Republican side. So in essence, we need a 50-vote majority, right, to get rid of the filibuster rule, and so that we're able to bring those bills to the floor and pass them with a simple majority, just the 50 votes plus one, not with the 60 votes. And so Sinema and Manchin have expressed their opposition to doing away with the filibuster. And so that's why we're at. I've been an advocate that the bill should come to the floor anyways, and to have them cast their votes. Let them explain to the American people why they are citing on this page, on this chapter of history, right? A very troubling one that stands for potentially, because if you take a look at what's happening in states like Georgia, where it has become a criminal offense to give a bottle of water to a senior citizen standing on a voting line for 2 hours, and the other measures that are being taken in other states. 44 states have already enacted some type of voter suppression legislation in the country. If you take a look at what's happening there, the states are really running wild, and we need to reel them back and have the federal government say enough is enough. We're going to support people's rights to vote. And so we got to hold them accountable. We should be calling Sinema and Manchin, particularly this week, as we prepare to, the Senate prepares to vote this and debate this on their floor.
Okay, so what you're saying, because that was, of course, another question that we here at Harlem Network News had. What can we as citizens do? Because a lot of this is extremely frustrating, you know, as people get out to vote. And in New York City, obviously, that's a whole nother kind of situation, because we really have a very low voting turnout. You know, we have to say it, because if we don't say it, then we can't address the problem. A lot of it, you know, people will turn out for the presidential election, but when it comes to local elections, which really matter just as much, they're really not turning out. So that's a New York City thing, you know, but in other parts of the country, as Congressman Espaillat has mentioned, you know, there's a lot of voter suppression that is stopping seniors and people from voting, just like it was in Dr. King's time. So we really are rolling back. So
just to give you an idea, Terry, some of the measures that are being taken are, for example, to reduce the number of poll sites available. So obviously, if you have a poll site 5 blocks away from where you live, that's a lot easier for you to go cast your votes as to having your poll site 3 or 4 miles away. So they're reducing the number of poll sites. They're reducing people's ability to vote early. Lots of people in certain states vote early. They have drive-through sort of like voting methods, right? And they're curtailing that ability for voters. And in many cases, as many as 50% of the voters vote early. And so if you reduce the ability of voters to do that, you're restricting access to the ballot box. And that's what's happening across the country. That's happening in state legislatures across the country. So this vote will prevent that from occurring. And so this is so important. And there are 2 senators that are Democratic senators, part of our party, that seem to be on the wrong side of this. So they must hear from each and every one of you. They must be called and they must be told that this country is for voter protection and people's access to the ballot box.
Okay. So that's Senator Manchin. And for the listening audience, what state is Senator Manchin from?
Senator Manchin votes, he represents West Virginia. And Christian Sinema represents Arizona.
Okay. All right. So we'll try to get that to the listeners, but everybody should flood their lines. And also our New York State Senator Schumer, who's at the helm, our State Senator Christian Gillibrand. And I guess that's what we can do. What else can we do? And if you can share with us, because, we hear so much, but.
I mean, we organize. We have always good organizing has always, done well for our communities, and as we approach Martin Luther King's Day tomorrow, right? I think we should recommit our communities to organizing our neighborhoods, our cities and states, to ensure that they are fully aware and educated on these issues, Terry, because as you said earlier, I agree with you. This is complicated, and people fighting COVID and trying to make ends meet and dealing with all the challenges that this pandemic era has placed before us, very often lose sight of what's important in that particular realm, right? So I think it's important that we continue to educate, we continue to organize, we continue to be part of groups that are out there advocating for voting rights. I know there's going to be a mobilization tomorrow in Washington. I'll be at NAN, at National Action Network tomorrow, where Reverend Sharpton will be there. Mayor Eric Adams will be there tomorrow morning, and we'll all concentrate there and go over the actions that we must take to win back these rights and privileges that were given to us. It was bloody. People died to give us those rights. Martin Luther King was assassinated because he was a leader in the leader of that movement, and others as well. So, we must fight back to protect these rights.
Okay, well, thank you. And just for further clarification, the voting rights bill, and I'm Terry Wisdom, this is Harlem Network News, and we are going to be transitioning shortly to our Dr. Keith Cummings, who is going to speak with us about COVID in the community. But I wanted just for clarification, the voting rights bill that is on the floor and the John Lewis voting rights, is that the same thing?
There are 2 bills, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting and Voter Advancement Act. Both of them have passed the House already, right?
Okay.
So they're really being taken up by the Senate. Now, the John Lewis bill is one that restores some of the voting rights that were eliminated by the Shelby versus Holder case. Okay, and it gives us the ability to fight back discriminatory laws regarding voting. The Freedom to Vote Act is a broader piece of legislation that deals with transparency in campaign financing, gerrymandering issues, and a host of other voting-related issues. But the John Lewis one looks to restore, right, all the provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act legislation that were watered down or eliminated by the Shelby case.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
Thank you so much.
As we hear the two things, we're like, okay, so I want to make sure everybody knows what's going on and now understands that these bills have passed. And just quickly, what about the George Floyd bill? Because we're always hearing these three things together. What is that, and where are we with that?
Well, there's a package, that was put together with the help of the Congressional Black Caucus. We have passed that in the House, and that is also another piece of legislation that we're looking to see taken up by the Senate. And so a lot of the important work that we've done in the House, including the Build Back Better Act, which proposes to provide $1.7 trillion in help to the American people, are stuck in the Senate. And so that's why this is so important, because the same way we're seeking to do away with the filibuster rule for voting rights, that's the same angle, that's the same roadmap that we'll have to take also to pass the Build Back Better Act. And so in many cases, these initiatives will be blocked by the Republicans, and we need all 50 Democratic senators to hold tight together to be able to pass this in the Senate.
Okay. Well, thank you. There's so much to deal with.
Thank you.
So much to share. I mean, I always do say that, COVID has been horrific, but it's really taken a lot of scabs off the wound to really show what is happening in this country, to show the disparities, and just for people to get more engaged, because things are hitting people in the face, and that is making, just in terms of even a great person like Marcus Garvey said, change happens when things happen. And I'm paraphrasing, that make you have to, acknowledge that there's an issue and that there's change.
Yeah, every crisis brings about great opportunities as well.
Yeah.
So maybe, this crises that we face provide the environment, the platform for us to make some dramatic change in favor of people across the country.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
And I look forward to being in the program again. Thank you so much.
Okay. And we'll take you up on that. There's so much and not so many things that have to be addressed, and we'll have to have you back to really speak directly on what things are going on in our community and how you as a congressman can impact them, because you have a very, very difficult job.
Well, we try. We work hard, and I'm happy to be part of your show at any time to inform my constituents.
So we're gonna, have you back. We're gonna take you up and look at all of the whole District 13. What can happen in Washington Heights? What can happen in, the West Bronx? What can happen in, East Harlem? And what can happen in Central Harlem? Because those are all the tenants of your district, and it's very difficult to address the needs of all of those. And you've got Central Harlem, which could, I don't know if it's the neediest, but it has the metropolis of 125th going through. There's so much with the war on drugs.
Vibrancy, but there's a lot of energy too, a lot of positive energy and a lot of good people there that working together, we can get a lot done.
Help is needed. 145, the Columbia, which is just recently announced that they've taken over Fairway. So there's a lot going on, and we've got to stay vigilant. And like you said, with the disparities that we're having, it's difficult. People are dealing with personal, the ERAP situation. It's so much. So, you know, we definitely will have you back to talk. And
thank you.
Tomorrow, for Martin Luther King Day, we are going to do some programming at 4. We're bringing in stakeholders, public officials. There's a great writer, producer, Michael Green, who has done several plays, Black Wall Street, and he's got a great play on Martin Luther King that will premiere. He did one on when Martin Luther King was saved at Harlem Hospital. And so he's going to do a little excerpt. We're going to have some stakeholders, public officials. You know, we don't want you to wear yourself out, but if you can drop in, you know, it's good, because I think cross conversation, all of our public officials, stakeholders, we're going to have some folks on from Esplanade Gardens, you know, some citizens, some seniors. Really important for all of us to come together. You know, you know.
And this is the kind of work that I commend you, Terry. Because even like speaking about Esplanade Garden, I know some of the things that are going on there. We know about the issue with the methadone programs and the other programs on 125th Street. I know that you were very much involved in what's happening there. You just mentioned how Columbia just purchased the Old Fairway site. So there's a lot going on. And, you know, unfortunately, there was a homicide in East Harlem, the young woman, another homicide in Washington Heights, I hear last night. So, you know, I try to stay on top of all of these and answer to as much as I can. But with your help, we'll be able to get out to more
important. And we want to salute our district attorney, our new district attorney, Alvin Bragg. He was on the pulpit speaking at Abyssinian Baptist Church. And in the spirit of Dr. King, it takes courage to stand up for what you believe in.
That's correct.
Courage is what's needed. So thank you, Congressman.
Thank you for having me once again.
Looking forward to seeing you at NAN. I know that
I'll be there.
An incredible time. So it's important that we all pull together and make sure all our communities are happening. There's so much going on, even in terms of you know, people that are not citizens here in New York being able to vote locally. So there's a lot to discuss and to assure that we work as one. Critical.
Thank you.
So thank you.
And
Dr. Keith Cummings, you can show yourself now. We have one of our formidable doctors that's here. We can't hear you yet, Dr. Cummings. Please, if you're able to show yourself, that would be great. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Cummings. Welcome, welcome. And we just had our Congressman Espaillat. I'm sure he's going to continue to listen. We're a little bit over in time, but for those of you who have just joined, I'm Terry Wisdom, and this is Harlem Network News. We're on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and soon to be on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And today we have a very, very special presentation. We have Dr. Keith Cummings. He is the attending physician at the Brooklyn Hospital Center. He's an associate professor of family medicine at St. George's University School of Medicine, a clinical assistant professor at HNN School of Medicine, New York, New York. And he has treated thousands of patients in and out of the hospital, COVID patients. He's guided the recovery of many patients worldwide, having traveled to combat COVID to his home country of Guyana, South America. He has just returned 2 weeks ago from Jamaica, helping there as a philanthropist. He is a family man of 4 with 2 school-age boys, a wife who is a research scientist at the Augusta, Georgia University, and we could keep going. So Dr. Cummings, thank you so much for joining us. And if you would just say hello to the Harlem Network News audience. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me, Terry. I hope my appropriate just
Breaking up just a little bit, Dr. Cummings, just a little bit.
can I turn?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and speak. You're breaking up just a little bit in the sound. Thank you.
Are you hearing me better?
Yes, that's better now. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, thank you for inviting me to the show. And
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Patients.
We're still getting a little bit of breakup, sir. Yeah, we're still getting just a little bit of breakup in your audio. Okay. Dr. Cummings is still having just a bit of breakup, and we have a little bit of background sound. So we know that this technical stuff is very difficult, but we're going to get this done because it's very important what Dr. Cummings has to share with us. Go right ahead, Dr. Cummings. I'm hearing some background sound.
Terry.
Yeah.
From your,
I'm sorry.
the background noise is from your end.
Okay, so let me mute. I'm going to mute myself and I'll let you share, you know, pretty much what's been going on with COVID and the community, and particularly where we are with the Omicron situation. I'll mute myself and let you go right ahead and speak. Thank you.
Okay. Are you hearing me better now? Very good. So, you know, in terms of which is this.
Yeah, we're still, I think we're still getting background, and I believe it's coming in on your end. So I'm not sure what we can do about it. And you're breaking a little bit. So go right ahead. It's okay.
Okay, are you sure? Because my background is very silent.
Okay, let's go. It's tech stuff. It's okay. We're gonna get this done.
The situation now is that we have, in the US, we have 873,000+ deaths. And worldwide, we have 1.5 million deaths. The dominant variant now is the Omicron variant. In the US, it accounts for about 99 plus, or 99.2% of the active infections. And the Omicron variant, the problem with the Omicron variant, it has many mutations. And particularly the Omicron variant has 36 mutations in the spike protein, which is the focus of therapy, is the focus of infection, and focus of concerns for mutations. So because of 36 mutations in the spike protein, it has another 12 mutation, other proteins, particularly M protein and E and N proteins. There are 4 structural proteins totally. That increases ability to enter the cell and also to anchor into the cell. And as a result of that, on average now, we have 1 in 5 Americans with actually have resolving COVID or active COVID infections.
Wow, 1 in 5. That's a lot.
And we have seen from the first index case that was diagnosed in California on December 1st, that was sequenced by the University of California in San Francisco. From that, we had a real uptick in infection. And throughout December, we have increased admission about 55% from a uptick in infection and increased hospital resources. We have deaths, but not like Delta. So the Omicron situation, in fact, the Omicron, it's as the R0 value or reproductive number, it can infect every person's infected. It has an R0 number of 3.17, 3.19. Compared to Delta, it's 3 times more infectious than Delta because of the R0 value or reproduction number. So every person that has an Omicron infection can infect at least 3 persons. And based on where you are, based on the epidemiological conditions, that number varies. And so you can have one person infecting more than one person. So in the hospitals now, I saw an article in New York Post was saying most people, approximately 50% or more people that have been hospitalized, they end up having an infection, COVID-19, even though they never went in for a COVID-19 scenario.
Okay. So what you're saying, just to break it down for the audience, is that there are people who are coming in the hospital, they never had a test, but they're infected. And this infection, depending on where you are, is very, very transmittable. You know,
Correct.
one person can infect 3 people. Do you think it's transmitting more in our community than in other communities, the communities of color, the urban communities, the rural communities? What's happening?
I think it's the right thing, but through the pandemic beginning, different community, they have more assault from the COVID-19 virus. So there is a little more increased infection in the immigrant slash Black slash Latino community when you look at the breakdown.
Okay, why do you think that is, Dr. Cummings?
There's as you know, there's disparity in availability of different resources, and it can be looked at in different 3 domains. One, preventative strategy, which is a problem with this coordination of care worldwide. Prevention in terms of vaccine availability, vaccine hesitancy, availability of masks, proper fitted masks. And the other domain you have to look at is diagnostics. So early diagnostics and treatment and tracing is very important to decrease the spread of the virus. And the third one you have to look domain that can cause that disparity is availability of evidence-based therapeutics that can decrease the severity of the illness and also shorten the duration of illness for each infected person. And generally, as a rule of thumb, a more economically deprived community, the more poor health indicators are seen. And in the pandemic, there is no different. More poor community, more poor health outcomes. Those epidemiological factors and health indexes that you measure are poor. So there is no difference from other diseases, chronic diseases in this.
Okay. So pretty much that leads us. I'm Terry Wisdom. This is Harlem Network News, and we're honored to have Dr. Keith Cummings here with us. He is at the Brooklyn Hospital Center, and he's treated over these 2 years almost thousands of COVID patients. And would you just share, Dr. Cummings, what some of the available treatments are for COVID patients, hospitalized and non-hospitalized patients? I think that's very, very critical. Thank you.
So initially there was nothing, and then we started hydroxychloroquine, which is touted as very good, been not very effective. And as you know, the past president touted it as a drug that was working. Then we transitioned to ivermectin, and most countries now don't want you to use ivermectin, and the same as the United States. WHO doesn't want to recommend it. Currently, the CDC doesn't recommend it. We moved to antidepressant medications. We moved to melatonin. We moved to HIV antiviral drugs. And now those things we don't use. We don't use ivermectin. We don't use hydroxychloroquine. And what we use now, out of the hospital, there are new therapies available. The number one frontline therapy that is evidence-based is the monoclonal antibodies. Mm-hmm. There were them on the market.
I'm sorry, Dr. Cummings, would you just say that again, because I want to make sure that our audience, you said there's, what is it that they can take now that's out of the hospital?
No, out of the hospital, those that you can take by yourself, immune boosters, vitamin C, primarily.
Okay.
You take higher doses than normal, than the standard recommended dose. The other thing you can take without a prescription is vitamin D3. And vitamin D3 particularly acts as an immunomodulator, not only in COVID-19, for general respiratory infections. The better your vitamin D3 blood levels is the better your response to active infections, bacterial and viral infection. And it's no difference in COVID-19. However, in COVID-19, you have to take higher doses, right? Make a difference. Because what it does, it decreases the amount of inflammation in your body, and it also decreases the duration of the inflammation, and it decreases the length of time to recovery. So you have a shorter recovery time. Those people with low vitamin D levels are people who have higher mortality and actually progress to severe disease from mild to... And there's a study called the SHADE study, shows the very high concentration, almost 60,000 international units of vitamin D3 over a 7-day period. And they found that those levels at a higher level yield better measurements, decreasing measurements of your inflammatory markers. Because remember, COVID-19 attacks your immune system, and your immune system over-exaggerates. So we call it a hyper-inflammatory state, or cytokine storm. So if you take higher level based on the SHADE study, you can decrease these excessive inflammatory markers, decrease your pain, decrease the body ache, decrease the respiratory problem, decrease the time to recovery. The other thing that people take by themselves is zinc. That seems to decrease the viral entry into the cell. So the top 3 things that people take is vitamin D3, as I said, vitamin C, and zinc. But in terms of prescription medication, those are what you can get from a physician. Outpatient, the best evidence-based therapeutics that is available are monoclonal antibodies. And there were 3 on the market, and the names end with Vimab, V-I-M-A-B. And these Vimabs, or monoclonal antibody, they basically block the spike protein from the virus from anchoring onto the human host cell receptor, which we call the ACE2 receptor, angiotensin converting enzyme receptor. So that's how the virus enters the cell. Once the virus spike protein binds to the receptor, the ACE receptor, it can wiggle through into your cell, and then you get an infection as a result of that. And most of the ACE receptors are in your respiratory system. So in the case of Omicron, it attacks more the upper respiratory system. So these monoclonal antibodies will block that interaction with the spike protein ACE. And initially we have casirivimab mixed with indevivimab. So the Vimab is the end of the name. And there's another one called bamlanivimab and estisivimab. So those long names, all of them end with a mab, a Vimab, V-I-M-A-B. But the only one that seems to work now is one called sotrovimab. So sotrovimab is the only one that has worked against the Omicron. So because of the 36 spike mutations plus 12 other mutations from the other structure, make the Omicron very evasive, not only preventing these monoclonal antibodies from working, but it actually latches on to the human cell more tighter. So the only one that is recommended right now is sotrovimab.
Sotrovimab, okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, how does anyone get, because a lot of people that I've been speaking to in our community that are going to their doctor, their general practitioner, they're not getting a recommendation if it's early to get any monoclonal antibodies. So what do you have to do? Because this may come where the disparity factor comes. What does a regular person in the community have to do to get the monoclonal antibodies, to get that help? What does one have to do?
Once you feel you have symptoms of COVID, the best time to treat it is in the first 5 days. Your pretest probability is low in the first 48 hours. Let's say you get exposed. You can't test right away. The probability of you having positive test within the 48 hours is very low. So you may yourself. Once the 48 hours pass, you've been exposed. It's best if you begin to have symptoms to get the test. Your pretest probability is higher after the 48 hours. And your treatment is best within the first 5 days. You can go up to 10 days. If you feel you have symptoms of COVID, in case of Omicron, you have head symptoms such as headache, nasal congestion, you have cough, sore throat, fever subjective, and body aches, joint pains. You have taste or smelling problem, but it's not that marked compared to the Delta. More people complain of being tired and having body ache and sore throat and headache, and a little bit of cough. And so once you find these symptoms are becoming evident, especially you're beginning to get tired or not feeling yourself, get tested after the 48 hours. Your pretest probability is the higher, especially the rapid test. The rapid test, I put all of them together from various manufacturers, and I say it has a 65% positivity rate. So if you test with no symptoms, your test will be negative. If you test with symptoms after the 40, your test probability is higher. And within the first 5 days, if you treat, is better.
Okay, so the difference, because the rapid test is easier, you know, now you can kind of get it over the counter, but the PCR, you know, people are having to wait on lines, and I don't know if they can get it. But what is the difference between the PCR and the rapid test? Is the PCR like, you know, more accurate, even though we know it takes longer? So by the time you get it back, you know, if you need to get treated in the 5 days, what is the recommendation on that? Is the PCR, you know, better than
yes?
Rapid
If
test?
you're having no, yes, definitely better. PCR has less negative tests. If you take 100 people and test them, the PCR will give you more positive tests, right? It has more sensitivity compared to the rapid test. The rapid test will miss a lot of positive cases, especially they don't have symptoms, and especially if you test before 48 hours. If you have COVID, your rapid test is negative, the best next step is to get a PCR. Especially you have a family member or a staff or somebody you definitely know has COVID. It's best to get a PCR for confirmation, right? Okay. As I say, you have a window of the first 5 days. But the other way you can help yourself is to Google. There is a New York State website that you can find into the New York Department of Health. It can tell you where the monoclonal antibody is being given, or just Google where is monoclonal antibody being administered, and they will give you the hospitals that give this. Or they basically is an outpatient treatment. The monoclonal is for mild to moderate symptoms. The purpose is to decrease your progression from mild to moderate to severe symptoms, especially you have a lot of comorbidities, brain problem, heart problem, lungs problem, kidney problem, diabetes. You have a lot of medical devices in your body. Your risk of higher, right? So
okay, thank you.
Those therapy can decrease your progression and hospitalization and death about 85%. But you also see on the market now, there are 2 therapies that it's not widely available, but it's promising. This drug from Pfizer is called Flaxslovan. It has 2 drugs inside, are nirmatrelvir and ritonavir. Ritonavir is an HIV drug, actually. So they combine nirmatrelvir and ritonavir, and they call it Flaxslovan. This basically inhibits the virus from making itself by disrupting the way it breaks down the big, long polyprotein to smaller ones. And so the virus can make itself. So it's very promising. The only caveat is this, is that you can use it for 12 years or and above, patients within 40 kilograms. They have mild to moderate symptoms. The best, again, is within the first 5 days of symptoms. Now, the only thing with this Flaxslovan, this sounds promising. A lot of people are calling me from other countries to ask about it. You cannot use it if you're on certain drugs.
Okay.
For example, if you're on HIV drugs, it already has an HIV drug, ritonavir, inside. If you also on certain cardiac medications, for example, amiodarone, it can cause interrupt because this drug, particularly the one called ritonavir, it affects specific enzymes in your liver, so it affects the metabolism of other drugs. So if you're a psychiatric patient, you're on clozapine, clonopin. Actually, they actually increase the concentration of clonopin. So you have to have a pharmacist take, and you have to follow up in a clinic to monitor your serum concentration of clonopin, because you're gonna have toxic levels. If you're on TB medication such as rifampin, you have to be monitored. If you're on statins, cholesterol lower drug, you may have to stop that totally. So it's not a drug for everybody.
Okay.
But it's very promising. There's another one from Merck called molnupiravir. That one, I wouldn't recommend that one. That one has it touted as a very efficacious drug initially when it came out, but now the efficacy is just down to 30% versus Flaxslovan of 88%. So 30%. The other thing about molnupiravir is that the mechanism of action include causing the virus to mutate. So by causing it to mutate, it actually caused the virus to make the false components of its protein that has to make the other little baby viruses. So this induced what we call mutagenesis. And there was theoretical concern that it may cause mutations of the DNA of the human, or even DNA mutation in new variant. So that one a little iffy, even though the Food and Drug Administration said they will monitor it. I wouldn't recommend molnupiravir or the Merck brand.
Okay. So question, Dr. Cummings, and I'm Terry Wisdom. This is Harlem Network News, and we are honored to have Dr. Cummings here today with us, who is attending physician and also an educator in medicine and has treated thousands of COVID patients, lots of COVID patients in our community and in different places in the world, from Jamaica to Guyana, which is his home. And Dr. Cummings, so let's say if I test positive and I find out, that I do have COVID, can I just, quote, walk into Harlem Hospital and let them know, listen, I'm having symptoms. What can you give me? And are they gonna give me the antibodies? Are they gonna give me the, whatever the other treatments are? Is that, if I just walk in the hospital, is that gonna happen? And also, there are people who are concerned, that are afraid to go to the hospital to try to get these things because they don't wanna stay in the hospital. So what is the process and the procedure? Because it's very important that our community, has the knowledge and is aware of what we can do to help ourselves.
Yes, I think everybody should have a pulse oximeter at home. If your oxygen is low, reading in the low 95, it's going down below 95, you should take care, because you don't want it to reach 90s, the low 90s. It's if your heart rate is going up, your blood pressure is getting low, you're feeling short of breath, difficulty breathing, you should go to the hospital. But before you reach that stage, if you have mild to moderate symptoms, you're not in respiratory, your pulse oximeter is reading nice, it's above 95, that's the time to get these drugs. particularly they risk stratify you based on whether you have comorbidities. The idea is there's a high probability of you becoming more sick. They will give you this drug. So the best thing to do is go to that emergency room, go to that urgent care center, because these medications are not really for inpatient therapy. They're really for outpatient therapy. And if you're elderly, greater than 65, you have a heart condition, liver conditions, kidney problems, and there's a risk for you to get the severe disease, you will qualify for this.
Okay, okay, so that's good to know, because you know some people, like I said, are afraid to go to the hospital, you know, because they don't know what's going to happen there. And then you know, some people's regular general practitioners are pretty much saying there's nothing that they can do and they're not eligible for these things, you know. So these are some of the things that are concerning in terms of the education of the people. Thank you for sharing. What can you just, which I think a lot of us are familiar with that word now, but what are comorbidities? We heard that a lot in, you know, the beginning of COVID, and that a lot of our community has more comorbidities, so therefore they're going to get sicker. What is that, please?
Yeah, it's basically you have chronic medical problems that you're on some form of treatment for. For example, the number one is diabetes and hypertension. Right. Other irregular heartbeats, you're on oxygen because your lungs has some defect in clearing carbon dioxide, COPD, asthma, cystic fibrosis. You have blood disorders such as sickle cell. You know, you have cancer, blood-related disorders. Those are the things that we talk about, particularly people with diabetes. Number one is diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. So it's chronic medical problems that you have that if your body comes under stress because of this respiratory virus causing increased oxygen requirement, your heart and your lungs would not work. It's a supply demand thing. It would not work hard enough to meet the metabolic demands of your body. And so you end up with heart irregularities, heart failure, and cardiac arrest, and subsequently you end up with multi-organ failure. All your organs begin to go out of whack, and all of them begin to fail, and usually what happens is death ensues.
Okay.
Or if you go in the ventilator, and 8 out of 10 people would not survive if you go in the vent. Okay.
Okay. So thank you for sharing that so people can understand what's happening. What should, like, if you're home and you have COVID and the symptoms are mild, what should you do? And also, how do you know you're done with COVID? Like, will you still test positive, like after the 5 or 10 days? How do you know it's finished? And I know I'm throwing 3 questions at the same time, but what happens with the long-term symptoms of COVID? How do you know you're done, and what should you do when you're done with it? And
okay.
Are you contagious still?
One, you feel you're better, you're basically back to baseline. Your test may be positive or your test may be negative. And that comes to another discussion with people going back to work with positive tests. So if you test negative, if the test is done appropriately, you get a PCR test and it's negative, there's high probability you truly are negative, but you still have lingering symptoms of difficulty breathing. If you walk very fast, you still have some foggy brain or weakness. You may have some residual symptoms, but you don't have active COVID infection, and you may not transfer the infection to another person. But a negative test does not rule out that you still can have the disease, because some people continue to shed the virus for a longer period of time. You know, the United Kingdom Health Security Agency network database said after 5 days, especially the Omicron, you're less likely to transmit the virus. It drops by 31%. If you go to day 7, it drops to 16%, and day 10, you drop by 5%. That's pretty good, you know. So with all of that and data from the US, they decided, okay, If you're LK worker, you're afebrile or absence of fever for 72 hours or 48 hours, you have a positive test, you can still don a mask, an appropriate fitted mask, by the way, and come back. And because, yes, Omicron is highly transmittable, but they found that your transmission risk decreased exponentially as days go by to 10. And there are other groups of people argue against this, saying really and truly they don't agree with this. So you're really, most people who have a negative PCR and no symptoms feel like based time really the disease is finished.
Okay. And how long, you know, and I guess it varies per person, but some of these long-term symptoms after having COVID, how long might they last, or what should people do? You know what I'm saying? Because they're out of the 10-day period, they're out of the 14-day period, but they still don't have the energy. They still may be having the aches and pains. What should you do?
The most important thing, simple thing you can do is keep moving.
Okay.
Because the hyperinflammatory symptom, this cytokine storm that we hear a lot on TV and in the media, it actually makes your muscle weaker.
Oh.
A lot of people, especially the Omicron, physician, nurses, and ordinary non-healthcare workers, they complain of weakness or tired. And it's because of that excessive information that I mentioned earlier about. If you keep moving, it's very important to get back your muscle strength and tone. And you need to hydrate. Hydration is fundamental because a lot of people during COVID, their appetite is low. The intake of fluid is low, and they do have kidney impairment. Even COVID itself can impair your kidney function because it's hyperinflammatory state. So a lot of people come in with acute kidney injury, and you need to keep that hydration going. The other thing I would tell people, never lie on their backs because it causes the smaller airways in your lungs, in the back of your lungs to collapse. And that's what you find with a lot of people having difficulty breathing because of atelectasis or collapse of those small airways. So you need to keep lying on your side or your abdomen or tummy and not to lie on your back. Keep your plate colorful. You should eat food of variety that is rich with antioxidants, that your immune system, and keep that vitamin C going, keep the vitamin D going, particularly that vitamin D, you should keep going. If you're coughing, you can ask your physician for assistance, but I don't like the idea of people taking dextromethorphan, which is a cough suppressant.
Okay.
You take guaifenesin, Robitussin without the DM, or any expectorant that doesn't suppress. You should not suppress your cough. You need to bring up that.
You need to get it out.
If your cold is becoming colorful and malodorous, you need to ask your physician to put you on antibiotics.
Okay. Say that again, please, doctor. Thank you.
If you recognize the sputum that you're coughing up, it's becoming yellow, greenish, or it's begin to smell bad, you most likely would need antibiotics. And there's specific antibiotics we give for this COVID period.
Okay.
If you are over the risk of you getting an irregular heartbeat, so we choose other types of antibiotics. If you're less than 65, we choose a different types of antibiotics. So it's very good to call your physician, and so they choose the best one. Because not only you have a viral infection, because your immune system is exaggerated and malfunctioning, you can have secondary infection, meaning you can have bacterial infection. So you kind of have double pneumonia. You have COVID pneumonia, plus bacterial pneumonia now. So you have two infections now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Cummings. There's so much information to take in, but I kind of feel like I said, COVID, I'm Terry Wisdom, this is Harlem Network News, and COVID has really taken the scab off the wound. And I really feel like from COVID, we've all really almost gotten our doctorate in technology. And then it's almost like from COVID, we're really having to get our medical information together. We're having to get our nutritional information together. We're having to, you know, just keep our bodies moving. So it's bad, but in some ways, it's making us more conscious and more aware. I wanted to just ask you, like, in terms of the vaccine, the non-vaccine, and, you know, obviously that's not a discussion to even really get into, but with this Omicron variant, it appears that more people have that are vaccinated and boosted have still contracted the Omicron. And then also is people that had COVID once and now they're getting it again and they're vaccinated and boosted. Why is this happening? What is this about? Thank you.
It's a very good question. The first case of COVID Omicron variant that came into US is somebody who was fully vaccinated that they discovered in California. The person was at 2 doses of Moderna, and December 1st, it was discovered in the United States. So it shows how infectious the Omicron is and emerging variants with more mutations, 36 spike mutations on the Omicron. And check Omicron versus, for example, Alpha. Alpha's 10 spike mutations, Beta's 11, and the Gamma's 12, and the Delta's 9 mutations. With that, natural tendency is the virus become more infectious. It's evading the antibodies, naturally produced antibodies if you had a prior infection, and even the vaccine-generated antibodies, which are supposed to block your spike protein from the virus from anchoring onto the human host ACE receptor. So naturally, the virus is much more penetrative, much more evasive, and as a result, we have more infection. And so what you have is vaccines that were very highly efficacious and effective, becoming less efficacious and effective. So it's evading, and that's why the emphasis now is to boost, to take a 3rd shot, and maybe even a 4th shot and a 5th shot. And even in Israel, you can see people on the 5th shots now. Mm-hmm. So people want to know if it's worthwhile vaccinating or not to vaccinate. And it's very personal, it's highly controversial.
Yes,
it's challenging people's rights to decide. It's mandatory.
Yes.
Should I keep my job or not to keep my, and it even worse now, I go further, is even heart-wrenching because you have to decide for somebody else, and in this case, your daughter, your son, who may not, maybe 5 years old, because we start giving it from 5 years old.
Yes.
So those people are not at the age to really make a really good decision, and that's where it puts you in to make that decision. But overall, the argument and the data is showing that people who are vaccinated are dying less, and had less infection before Delta, are hospitalized less, and had severe symptoms less. There is still argument that even Omicron, the vaccinated have less symptoms, but you're dead right. Right now, initially, as we see, it was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Mm-hmm. Arguably, it may be just a pandemic of everybody now, you know? It's just a pandemic of whether you have 1 vaccine, 2 vaccine, 3 vaccine, 4 vaccine or not. But the data is showing that if you're vaccinated, still yet, even before there was a big gap between the unvaccinated and vaccinated. The unvaccinated was the one who really was showing hospital admissions, death, and severity. Now, it doesn't matter. You begin to see people who are fully vaccinated dying, and even people with boosted dying. And I have people call me from different countries, people, and I have no personal patient and associates and colleagues, family, or a friend of a friend whose family had died despite being triple vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So it's very, very, it's very debatable. It's But the data overall, if you really to plot a curve, shows that the vaccinated did better and probably may continue to do better. And it's a rolling data, right?
Okay,
But
yeah.
infection, the vaccine or no vaccine, you're getting infected. The probability of dying, both people can die.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And as you said, Dr. Cummings, this is a very fluid situation. COVID has been a fluid situation. Nobody could have told us 2 years ago that we would still be here. There would be, mutations, but I think we're all working at it. We're all becoming more educated. And even as layman people, we have to take it in our hands to quote, like heal ourselves by getting all the information we can, by having great medical minds like yours who also has the practical experience. But I just have one other question, and I know we're going a little bit longer, but this information is so important and so critical. I'm Cherry Wisdom, this is Harlem Network News, and we're here with Dr. Cummings, who has treated thousands of COVID patients, is an attending physician, Brooklyn Hospital, also teaches at 2 schools of medicine. Question, as people are getting boosted, then may get another shot, like in Israel, you said people might be up to 5 shots. What is the impact on someone's immune system if they're getting all these boosters and vaccines? Does that break down the natural immunity? That's a question that's coming from some of our listeners.
Yes, that's a question that a lot of people ask all the time. Based on CDC's data and worldwide data, the argument is no, it does not. You can only go with evidence-based information that is coming out from respectable sources. That's the information. But there are people that are arguing that it does to some extent, but you can only make a really good decision on that. Is it 100% true? Over a long period of time, you have to plot longitudinal data. You have to analyze the data over a long period of time to really say 100% I'm sure. I don't think anybody's 100% sure, right? There's no 100% proof. Mm-hmm. But the information, evolving information, it seems most likely that's not the case. It's that there's no major immune damage. Mm-hmm. And the argument is the infection actually caused more damage. Right?
Okay, got it. Okay. That the infection itself could cause more damage.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Now, what about, because this is like another question coming from the audience, people that have comorbidities, even with the vaccine, don't tend to make as many antibodies to protect themselves. What is that? What is that factor? Or maybe that's just a myth. I don't even know.
Particularly people with immune compromise, such as HIV, chronic long-term infections such as tuberculosis, plasmosis, those big words, disease, those chronic long-term infection, they are on long-term immunosuppressants such as steroids and other big immune modulating drugs that actually change your immune system. They seem not to make enough antibodies. Even though they're vaccinated, they don't have adequate protection. And so the working push is to ask them to not only take 2 vaccines, and they need a booster and maybe another booster, right? So indeed, yes, some people would not produce enough antibodies, even though they are fully vaccinated, and they are much more at a higher risk. And so in other words, there's not a suit that fits all. It's not a one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And then we're going to get to the conversation on the mask and what kind of mask and anything else you feel is pertinent. But there's also been concern particularly for young people in terms of the effect of the vaccine on the reproductive system? You know, that's a buzz conversation that goes on. Is there any data on that? You know?
Yes, that's a good question. A lot. I would tell you honestly, there's a lot of female, not only in the US, but abroad, that I had conversation with. They claim post-vaccination they've had irregular menstrual cycles. Mm-hmm. That's a common theme. The initial data, especially from Frontline Doctors of America and other organizations, the messenger RNA vaccines, the component in there can cross-react with a part of your placenta, right? There's layers in the placenta. The placenta has different layers, and they have the same structural formula makeup to that of the placenta, and it can affect your baby. Mm. The website, they're saying, no, this is not true. So it's a, you have to see this thing over a period of time. The current position on the CDC and other expert organizations, it does not cause abortion. It does not affect your fetus. But as I said, my personal experience, these are people who are healthcare professional, non-healthcare. They claim that they have irregular menstrual cycles post-vaccination. Mm. And, they're bleeding heavier. They're more irregular. And so there have to be some truth behind this story. I don't think people are making this up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
People who claim that are credible people, you know, they're credible people. And so making.
Okay. So, you know, just important. I mean, there's so much going on. We're just trying to be as informed as possible. And the last question, and then any closing words and information that you feel we need to know. But what about the children and the vaccine? Is it safe? They're saying it's safe, that the children should get the vaccination. What have you seen on the clinical side? And what are the thoughts, particularly for our community? Because in a community of the people of color, you know, our most valuable asset is our children. It might not be money, but it's our kids. So what are your thoughts and what's your thinking?
My practice doesn't feel the information I'm getting is very hard to decide to give your child a vaccine because they're still hesitant because of they need more information, even though the vaccine has proven it will help in the entire pandemic in decreasing severe symptoms, hospitalization, and death. So I might not be the best person to ask that question.
Okay.
In general, as you see from the website and other organization, they're saying it's safe. Except they do admit that there are some instances where there's adverse events occur in children, particularly they have inflammation of the heart, blood disorders. We have, especially young people less than 35 years of age, and children. And so there evidence in other countries that I know where kids took the vaccine and in the US that end up with inflammation of the heart and also died. But the argument is that the infection is so severe, it's best to take the vaccine. So you weigh the risk. It's best to vaccinate and take the risk because if you have the infection, it's coming back. But you may counter argue, and this occurred, which I had to discuss. Well, you know, what about Omicron? It's less severe. So why should I give my kid? Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable counter argument because it's less severe. The probability of my kid dying is less. Maybe your kid may be the unlucky one. So the argument still again is vaccination is better than non-vaccination.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing, Dr. Cummings. You know, certainly this has been a grade 101 and 102 to medical school, and we're all listening as hard as we can and interpreting everything because we know we have to. But would you share a little bit, because I know one of the things that you wanted to speak about was the type of mask that we need to wear and the way we can protect ourselves with that. And then anything else that you think is pertinent. I tried to ask and get as much information to the people as possible. So would you just enlighten us on the masking situation? Thank you.
Well, the best mask to wear would be the N95 or KN95 or FF2 mask. They're more the standard bearer. They protect you about 95%. The tests are standardized to 0.3 micron size particles, and that's very, very tiny particles. They nanoparticle, less than 1 microns, so even more smaller. So most experts are advocating to upgrade to N95 or KN95. They're available more than before. Before, in the height of the pandemic in last year and 2020, they don't want the public to wear N95, KN95 because they want the healthcare professionals to do so, but they are in the front line. But now we have seen the cloth mask. If you wear, it's protection range about 26.5 to 79. So 26.5 to 79. So that's pretty wide range. If you wear a cloth mask with 3 layers, it has a protection about 26.5. That's a cut, especially if it doesn't have a nose bridge, the 26. Right. So that's a pretty low fitted filtered protection. You have to fit that mask appropriately. Now, if you put in a nylon with a filter and put in the nose bridge, it's jumped about 79%. So you get a protection just on 80%. If you move to a surgical mask, and a surgical mask that you see people wearing in the healthcare industry, you have the ones with the ear loop alone as a protection, and actually have a surgical mask here. This surgical mask, ear loop, as a protection about just 38.1%. If you look here, there's a big gap here.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't protect you. It doesn't fit very well because your fitting of the mask, whether you have beard and the shape of the face, has significant impact on the filtration capacity of that mask and the efficacy of the filtration. So it's very important that the fitted filtration efficacy be looked at. So this is only 38.1%. Right. Now, if this mask, and there are some used in the operating room as a tie, you put this and it ties up on the back of your head. It has protection jumps up to about 7 to 8, about 71.5, 72% above that. So with 38 to 72, the surgical mask protects you if it's tied. So you can see this severe discrepancy if with the Omicron variant, so much infective, so much tight latch onto the ACE receptor, you can't afford to wear a cloth mask that give you 26 to 79% protection, or a surgical mask that give you just 38 protection with your loop or with the tie just 71. So for health professional, the best thing to do is to wear N95. This is the grade that we wear in the hospital. It has a nose bridge. All right. This is nose bridge. It's pretty tight. Or you wear a KN95. All right. This is a KN95 mask. N95.
Okay.
Once you put N95 plus a surgical mask, you jump your protection above 100%. Okay. So in Europe now, if you see United Kingdom, Austria, Germany, most of the countries, Greece, are advocating if people are moving in the public to wear a KN95 or FFP2 grade mask or N95. So a lot of people are going for KN95 now. We really want to prevent or even transfer the infection to someone else. I strongly to upgrade the mask for better protection and avoid.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think it's really important because people are just walking around in a mask Some of them don't have it above their nose and they're thinking they're good and they're not. And then the other concern, particularly for our community, is that the N95s and the K95 mask is expensive. And not only is it expensive, but it's hard to get it. Like a lot of the pharmacies don't have it. Thank goodness some of the public officials are getting them and they're handing it out. But I even tried to order, I did order from Amazon, and they sent me something saying, though you ordered, the manufacturer doesn't have it. So I think it's really, really important for people, first of all, to know. I appreciate you actually taking that mask, putting it on your own face, and showing us, you know, what protection we're actually getting. And the fact that you can wear your cloth mask, or not your cloth mask, but your surgical mask, put your N95 over. Now, if we do that, will that allow us to use the N95 or the K95 mask a few more times just because of the cost?
Yes, you can use your KN95, N95, and then apply a cloth mask if you want, or the surgical mask. It will increase your protection, so you can dispose of your surgical mask, and you have an opportunity to wash your cloth mask, which would protect the outer barrier. So the cloth mask always wash every day. You can probably keep it on, so you increase your protection, and you can save other people from getting infected and cross-infection. So that's a very good initiative. If the public health, the public officials, congressmen, and other people can be able to distribute these masks, high quality masks that are fitted, better fitted, filtered, it will make a big difference in their community. Because earlier, one of the things that caused disparity and inequity of resources in the number one domain is availability of preventative measures. Absolutely. Not only in having a robust personal immune system, is also to have a good barrier to the.
Okay. Now, the other thing that's been happening, and, you know, for me, you know, it's kind of like going out to public restaurants and places. It's like, okay, keep your mask on, but then eating, take it off. And, you know, obviously you have to take it off to eat, but there's a risk in that. Is there not? Or what are the thoughts?
Yeah, well, if you take your mask off, make sure you take your mask among people who don't appear sick, for example, you know?
Okay.
And if you take, make sure you have some distance. So you want that distance because the virus is a respiratory virus, transferred to the respiratory means. You have to cough, talk, sneeze, or sing to get this virus. Okay. I don't,
I'm sorry, what, we just lost you a little bit.
Continue to sanitize, which is important, but to get that barrier, you're gonna get that virus. And you may have it another time. Again, we see vaccinated, fully vaccinated, boosted, unvaccinated getting the virus. You don't want the thing the second time. It might not be a good for you because you, as you mentioned earlier, asked earlier, what about after infection? People just have lingering symptoms, this COVID long haul syndrome. And even physicians, I spoke to two physicians today that are extremely weak in 2 different states. And they're concerned about whether one claim that they feel delirious, you know, and it's definitely post-infection.
So there's a lot. I think we've kept Dr. Cummings so long.
So he's supposed to
we're gonna let you wrap up.
Yeah.
Okay. But thank you, Dr. Cummings. I mean, this has been invaluable information. And just the fact that you've taken the time, you've broken it down, explained it. I tried to ask as many pertinent questions as possible. But as closing remarks, can you just share with us a gist of what people need to know? And, you know, I know there's shedding dead virus, or so much complicity. But what is it in closing statements that you would like people to know? How can folks get in touch with you, and just what should they do? Thank you.
Well, in closing, I would say, if you really be, first of all, you have to be protected. Only that prevents against all the variants so far, and I think you should upgrade to the N95. You should strongly consider vaccination because it does help, and as decrease the severe symptoms, hospitalization, and death. You may argue Omicron is less severe, but yes, people are still getting hospitalized. People are still dying. Whether I should give my kids the vaccination, you should debate that with your family and your physician and make an informed decision. If we all achieve herd immunity, meaning we all begin to get natural infection from these more invasive and infective viruses, eventually at some point, it looks like we're getting better. If you check the trend from December to now, there's a rapid uptake, almost 30,000, 40, 47,000 over the last 7 days. But now it's like peaking and tapping off. And so even though we still have a lot of people infected, you can see the infection per day, for average, for 7 days is tapering off in New York. This is a good sign. It means a lot of people are infected, and we're getting some kind of immunity in the herd. And that's promising. You should continue to get tested if you find you've been exposed after 48 hours, ideal with symptoms. Try to get treated if possible within the first 5 days. You get a better outcome. You should also get a pulse oximeter to measure your pulse. The amount of oxygen is going through your fingers, and if it's getting below 95, you need to go to the hospital. You don't want it below 90. That's critical. You should encourage your family and yourself to take adequate hydration. Keep your vitamin C, vitamin D level up. Those are the pertinent ones. And if you're from the Caribbean community, I know a lot of people use a lot of herbal medications. Most people don't like to talk about them, but they seem to work in some people. Particularly as I noticed that there's a low incidence of infection in the Rastafarian community here in the US and abroad as I travel. And in fact, in the Bahamas, the Rastafarian Association, no infection in none of our members in this community. Also, I've seen as I travel around, there's also low incident. I personally have seen so many COVID-19 patients. I only see one Rastafarian who was totally asymptomatic. And there may be explanation, plausible, hypothetical explanation for this. And this may be supported by one study by Richard Van Bremen from Oregon State University, who found that cannabinoids block the ACE interaction with COVID-19 spike protein, and particularly two acids, the CBGA and the CBDA, they actually block. And if most of the receptors that COVID attacks are in the respiratory system, and if the Rastafarian cohort of patients are smoking, it maybe is modifying the ACE receptors and also associated proteins or proteinases that are associated with entry of this of the virus in the cell. And so this is all hypothetical, but Richard Van Bremen from Oregon State University research is an eye-opener to show that they extract the cannabinoids from hemp variety type of plants. And so maybe in the ganja too, they have cannabinoids, particular acid, not the THC that may be helping them. There are other people who are using other things. There's also a study in the Journal of Bioscience published in November 2021 that show Morinda citrifolia, which is referred to as Noonie in the Caribbean. It actually has compounds.
I'm sorry, what is it referred to?
Morinda citrifolia. It's also referred as Noonie.
Oh, Noonie.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, yes.
It actually blocks the, it has about 4 different classes of compounds. And these the chemicals, particularly the class iridoids. These iridoids, they're receptor They block the spike protein from coming into contact with the ACE receptor and also the transmembrane protein that is associated with viral entry. So people are taking this stuff at a high concentration and they seem to recover, especially in mild to moderate symptoms.
Okay.
People take things, especially in my country and in the Caribbean, I spoke Nigella sativa, which acts as an immunomodulator. It actually blocks a lot of the cytokines that are involved in this cytokine storm and improve recovery and shorten your symptom and progression to severe disease. There are multiple, or for example, there's one called Boswellia serrata, which is the Indian Frankenstein. It actually, most of the COVID patients from the Caribbean and Africa that use it told me that it's very important to improve the taste and smell. And they found that the taste and smell come back faster when they use it.
Is the frankincense a liquid or is it the frankincense you burn?
The name for Boswellia serrata is Indian frankincense, the Ayurvedic herb.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boswellia. You have the acid extract, but most of the Caribbean and African nationals use extract.
So it's an Indian frankincense that is the liquid. Okay.
One they use pomegranate extract. They found it blocked the spike protein interaction with the ACE receptor about 74%. Another one that I'm familiar with, also people use it a lot in Guyana, is called Dandelion. So Dandelion is a study published in March 2021 by University of in Germany, University of Freiburg. It's studying the medical journal in the British Medical Journal postgraduate medicine section. It actually has potent spike protein receptor blocking effect, and so it's a horrible medicine that. One of the interesting thing I found is that there's one echinacea, for example. Echinacea uses the same pathway that we are currently using a medication for very, very sick COVID patients called baricitinib. Baricitinib, it actually blocks a specific intricate pathway within the cell. It's like a signaling pathway. We call it JAK pathway, JAK, or Janus kinase pathway. So these group of enzymes or proteinases, they talk outside your human cell. So these cytokines that causes excess inflammation, they talk through the membrane of the cell, and these JAK kinase enzymes or proteinases, that's the way echinacea eye concentration operates. It's similar to baricitinib, but baricitinib is only used for patients who require oxygen on a ventilator or need ECMO. So I'm not saying it's, I don't even know the right concentration of echinacea to achieve the therapeutic dose, but there are a lot of combinations that there are studies that prove that these phytochemicals do have, and I'm promising their fight with COVID-19. And so people with mild to moderate symptoms, it can be explained why when they take these combinations of phytochemicals or bioactive compounds in herbal medication, they are feeling better.
Okay. Well, this is a wealth of information, and we so appreciate everything that you shared. And it also gives us hope, that, we're just not sitting ducks, and that there is something we can do. And there are some basics just in terms of hydration, not sleeping on your back, getting yourself tested, and knowing what your status is, and wearing that N95 mask, and then doing your research. If someone wants to find out more about the dandelion and the CBD and echinacea and the Indian frankincense, we're lucky today, because I guess we can just Google, and look up the information. So that part is a blessing. But we really, really greatly thank you. And if you'd like to just give a final word and tell the audience where they can get in touch with you, if that's appropriate, that would be great. So thank you, Dr. Keith Cummings.
Well, everybody should continue to stay safe, advocate for your neighbor, and your neighbor would advocate for the other neighbor. So all of us can go through the year. We want less deaths. The problem, there's severe disparity in terms of resources in the three domains that I mentioned earlier, and it's discoordinated globally in terms of prevention, availability of adequate, fitted, filtered, high-quality masks, the adequate availability of high-efficacy vaccination throughout the world has indeed prolonged this pandemic. The availability of adequate testing, whether it's PCR or rapid testing, even the US, I see the advocacy from the White House for 8 tests for each family per month, which is a good move. We doubt whether other countries can achieve that level with that limited resources, especially Caribbean countries and African countries, South American countries. I'm from South America. So, so this discoordinated within the United Nations, within WHO, within the CDC, all of that, the politicization of the care and resources and the definition of what the pandemic is and how it's transitioning, it's causing a prolongation. And the last thing that is causing a serious problem is the availability of evidence-based therapeutics that work. Particularly, not many countries have monoclonal antibodies, which in New York, you can Google and say, where can I get monoclonal?
Okay, you heard it here.
And you can go and get monoclonal in an urgent care or patient setting if you have mild to moderate symptoms, which significantly 85% decrease your hospitalization and severe symptoms and progression to we do have an opportunity, so we utilize it. It's best to seek the treatment, and if they don't give you, well, that's it, you didn't meet the criteria. If you don't meet the criteria, because they're set criteria in terms of your comorbidities, if you don't have a lot of comorbidities and you don't look like you're going to progress to severe symptoms and death, they won't give you, but at least you should seek it. You should continue to maintain a robust immune system with good nutrition, hydration, and natural immune boosters so that you can survive this pandemic. And I guess the other thing that prolonged the pandemic is just nature. The virus is highly mutant, and by nature, it's nature. So, but our behavior is what I think really drives the pandemic to prolong. From its inception, the working hypothesis is that our behavior in terms of eating an animal, a secondary animal that was infected with a bat that caused this problem, and then it continues with our own social behavior that prolonged it. So if we modify our social behavior, if we make resources in terms of prevention, diagnostic and therapeutics much more available, equitable, I think we can be able to join hands and celebrate at an earlier time than later.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Cummings. And you said something in between, and I don't know if that's impactful. Should people be having more of a plant-based diet?
I advocate. I personally don't eat no meat for the past 3 to 4 years. Personally, I'm going to divert from the topic. People with cancers who go on plant-based diet, people with diabetes, really it changed the survival rate. As a physician on the front line treating people in the hospital setting, I'm into like drugs. You got to take the medication. This is the system.
I hear you.
However, in terms of medication, with the current training that we have as medical doctors, is very, very negligible. We will be outperformed in terms of knowledge about diet from ordinance. And so that's one of the things in the medical curriculum. We don't emphasize diet, which is a cornerstone for good recovery.
Okay. Okay. Well, you heard it here. It's been shared. Knowledge is power, and Dr. Cummings has certainly given us a great knowledge base. And we are blessed to be in the age of technology, and we're trying to stop that from being a great disparity as well. But it's a lot easier to Google things and get some straight information and evaluate it from yourself. So thank you, Dr. Cummings. And we will look to have you back and support you and the great work that you're doing for the community. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, you just broke up a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. Have a wonderful evening.
Okay, thank you. And you can certainly email harlemnetworknews@gmail.com or call us at 646-261-5397. And if you have any questions for Dr. Cummings or any information, we certainly will pass it on and make sure that you're informed, because that's what we do. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Clubhouse, and we're here to serve the community. If there are donations you can make to help us keep the information flow going, or if you have a story or you have information, share it with us. I'm Terry Wisdom and Harlem Network News, and this has been quite a robust conversation with Dr. Cummings. Thank you. And we appreciate you and just being able to get this knowledge. So important. And we know you're doing it worldwide. So such a blessing. And good night. Thank you, Dr. Cummings.
Again, bye-bye.
And thank you, audience, and be safe.